what we see in the circular flow diagram is that our household is supplying all this labor, capital, and other raw materials to the firm. So that's the blue line. And the firm is buying them from the factor market. In the product market, our firm is supplying all these goods and services that are being bought by our firm, by our household. Okay, so in the factor market, our firm buys labor, capital, natural resources. In the product market, our household buys goods and services. So these are the two kinds of buying that are taking place. The supplying is coming from firms in the product market. The supply is coming from household in the factor market. These are all supply, purchase, and flow of actual resources and goods that you can see. But none of this flow would be completed without any kind of financial transaction. The outer flow really captures those. The flow of financial resources. For example, in the product market, when our household is supplying these land, labor, and capital, our household is receiving payments for those, such as wages, such as interest payment, something that we are going to look at later. But interest payment is going to be the payment for selling capital to the firm. To put it more formally, households will actually rent the capital to the firm. So we are going to distinguish that later on. Also, a household is going to also receive a payment for the natural resources that they are selling to the firm. So any kind of payment that stuff that are being sold in the factor market, the payments for them are denoted by the green arrows, and which are actually coming to the households, and they are coming from our firms. So notice where these payments are being generated. They are generated from the firm and they are going to the households. Then there is this another arrow. The other green arrow, which is also signifying the flow of financial resources, is coming from the households, where they are buying goods from the factor markets and they are paying prices for those goods and services. In our economics, the money or the price that household pays for the goods in the factor market are called spending. Okay? So, two kinds of financial transaction, wages and other kinds of payments going to the households, and spending going to the firms. Okay, so it seems like our household is kind of critical in this circular flow diagram, because if you look at the financial transactions are coming to the household first. They are receiving all these payments like wages and other kind of payments. It is going to create what we call an income for our households, and those incomes are later on spent on goods that firms are selling, and they are called spending, right? Now the question that will be central to your principles of macro course is that what kind of relationship do we see between income of the household and the spending of the household? Because these are just two sides of the transaction for a household. A household receives income from the firms, and then the household uses that income to spend on goods the firm is producing. What kind of relationship should we expect to exist between the income of the household and the spending of the household? What do you think? Obviously they are connected. You cannot spend more than your income, right? So spending by the households will always be smaller than their income, right? Why would your spending be smaller than your income?
Other expenses that you have to pay for.
What, like?
Like taxes, bills.
Very good. Two very important components. Let's hold that thought for 1 minute. I'm going to come back to this idea of tax in a minute. So taxes. Anything else that you think we are missing here that a household does? In this model, we are seeing a household is spending a lot of money in the market, so that makes sense. The household also does some stuff with taxes. We're going to come back to that.
They have to make the capital or whatever they're giving the firms. So like they have to produce the product.
Very good question. Very good answer. So in some sense, let's think about this, right? And this is where the assumptions that we made are kind of critical. We are making an assumption that our households really do not produce anything. Meaning that any kind of production takes place inside of a firm. So if a household is making or producing a capital, the household will be termed as a firm. Makes sense? So then, the activities that you are talking about will not be confined to the household, but it will be confined to the firm. Because a household can be treated as a firm depending on what kind of activities the household is carrying out. This is a more advanced concept. This is a macro concept. So let's ignore that for the time being. You can argue that, well, even if a household does not really produce these machines, the households at least need to, maintain these machines, right? And these service costs are important. We call them depreciation cost. Something, again, that will be critical to your macro course. Without going into the macroeconomic, side of our economics, can we point out one critical activities that are made by our households which are not included here? So
Savings.
very good. Very good. Okay, saving. Now, when a household earns income, part of that income is obviously spent on the goods and services in the form of spending. But in addition to this spending, a household probably has two other major sources of, funding expenditures. One is they have to pay tax, and then most of the times a household will save part of its income. That takes me to the criticism of the circular flow diagram model. Okay, keeping in mind of the two things that our household does, but is not reflected in this model, what do you think are missing from our circular flow diagram? Are we missing any important institution or players or elements in our economy? We are seeing firms, we are looking at households, we have two kinds of market. All these are realistic depiction of our actual economy with two important limitations. What is missing from this model that we see in our actual economy? Very good. The first thing that is missing, and I want to explicitly write that down, is government. Okay? If you put government inside, and you will put government inside of a more sophisticated circular flow diagram, you're going to say that this is a market where firms pay tax, households pay tax, government will also buy stuff from the product market like you and me. Government will also give stuff to households like transfer payments, like unemployment benefit. Government could also give stuff to the farm like a subsidy. Government could be connected with everyone in this economy. Just like the arrows that we saw that connects these household farms to markets, government is actually connected with everyone. So that's one very important institution that is missing from our circular flow diagram. What else? What else is missing? So what do you think? Where do households save?
Banks.
Very good. Right? if you look at the market, the model of the market, you would see that all these markets are really where physical stuff is bought and sold, right? A product market is where final goods are bought and sold or finished products are sold. The factory market is where raw materials are sold. But these are all stuff that are physical, right? They have a physical existence. They are used in a production process. You can use them, buy them. But obviously there are markets in our economy where only pieces of paper are traded, right? They're called financial markets. A financial market could be like a stock market. A financial market could be a bank. A bank is a market as well. And in order to really capture the saving behavior of our household, we are going to say that the second element that is missing from our circular flow diagram is banks. And I want to keep this simple and just put banks there and not put any kind of financial market, because banks more or less cover everything that the financial market does. Again, it's a macro concept. So with government and the bank, it seems like our model is kind of complete with one further limitations. What else do you think is missing? And I'm going to stop. I'm going to skip this question. I will put this question in your thought process, and I want you to think about what else is missing. The last remaining item which is missing is not that important. But we're going to come back to that in some future time. Okay? Any question about the circular flow diagram before we leave it? Okay. Now let us spend some time, and as a sort of a rule, as a sort of like a philosophical point of view, I really do not spend too much time talking about this idea of free market, because I really do not believe in free market, because free market does not exist. But from a pedagogical perspective, as an economist, we all really need to discuss about the role of free market and what can free market do for us. The discussion of free market starts very early in the economics, in the history of economics. Free market is where the market is completely unrestricted. A buyer is allowed to meet with the seller. A seller is allowed to sell anything to the buyer. And the buyer is allowed to buy anything from the seller at any quantity. That is what we call a free market, where everything is free. Meaning that every transaction is without any kind of restriction. That doesn't mean that free market is where you buy stuff free. Right? Are we all clear on that? Free market is not the market where you do not pay any price and get those stuff for free. That's a different kind of market, which we are going to also look at, where you can actually literally get stuff for free. So when we have a free market, we are mainly talking about a market where there is no restriction. Okay, one critical observation is that most of the developed countries around the world have somehow been able to create markets which are probably very close to a free market. That might give you a wrong impression that in order to develop, countries need free market, because it's a misperception. Again, this is a macro concept. We're going to take a look at that in other courses. But let's stick with this idea of a free market for a moment and look back at the history of where this idea of free market came about. The idea and the intuition behind free market is very, very old. Okay? It goes back to a book written by a very famous economist, probably the first true economist in the history. His name is Adam Smith. He was the finance minister of England during that time. He was a financial advisor to the Queen at that time. So Adam Smith wrote a book in 1776. The name of the book is kind of interesting, Wealth of Nations. And in that book, written so long ago, Adam Smith was talking about a very interesting word. Okay? He was talking about something called an invisible hand. When Adam Smith was defining what a market looks like, he thought that a market is like an invisible hand. When he wrote that book, so long ago, most of the people who read his book at that time thought that he was talking about something else. What do you think they were thinking when they were reading this word invisible hand in this famous book? That's a very impressive answer. And you're right. So when most of the people were reading this book, they were thinking that Adam Smith is referring to God, but he was not. He was referring to a more basic element that we see in a marketplace. Now Adam Smith, being an economist, was very much fascinated with the market, right? And he made one of the earliest observations about the market. He noticed that a market is kind of an exciting place, right? A market is a place where a buyer shows up to buy things and a seller shows up to sell those things. Now, where do they get this information? How do a buyer knows that if he goes to a specific place, there will be a seller who will sell the goods that he wants to buy? Are we all clear on that? More important, equally important is that how does a seller know that if he goes to this particular place, he will have a buyer waiting for him to buy his product? The word that, are we all clear on the question? The concept that Adam Smith developed is this idea of a rational behavior, something that one of you mentioned, I think in the last class. And Adam Smith argued that at the heart of a market lies this idea of rational self-interest behavior, which means that everyone in the economy are selfish, everyone in the economy have self-interest. They want to buy the things that they want to buy, they want to sell the things that they want to sell, and he argues that this self-interest brings a buyer and a seller together, meaning that a seller really finds the buyer and a buyer really finds the seller, and both of them end up in a same place called a market. So the invisible hand that Adam Smith was talking about is this self-interest behavior of everyone in an economy. And that's fascinating, because for a person to be able to write this kind of very critical views about the market so long ago is kind of fascinating. Because over time, I think, the scholars have become much more sophisticated and much more object-oriented. But Adam Smith was a very, very smart guy. Okay. So, a lot of discussions about the beauty of the market and, what it does. And most of this stuff are self-explanatory. Market obviously offers this flexibility. If you can buy whatever you want to buy, you can sell whatever you want to sell. At the heart of this market is this invisible hand that I just talked about, where individuals and the people and as a group collectively responds to their self-interest. A buyer wants to buy stuff, a seller wants to sell stuff, so they all meet with each other at the same place. Now, there are some, making connections kind of story. I encourage you guys to read on your own. I always run out of time, so I'm going to skip that. But this particular making economic connection is particularly important and interesting. It will tell you a story about how iPad is being made. And the argument is that, different components of iPad is being produced by different organizations. And, some of the components of iPad are being manufactured by firms that really does not even know that they are making components of an iPad. At the end of the day, all this comes together like a car, and you find the final product like an iPad. So this is where self-interest from so many different firms come together and produce a single product such an iPad. And that's the power of market. That markets bring everything that you want to buy. When we talk about the role of the market or the role of the free market that Adam Smith was so fascinated about, and to some extent really sort of argued in favor. So Adam Smith was a major proponent of keeping the market unregulated. He believed that if the market is unregulated, there are several benefits of having an unrestricted and unregulated market. One of the key benefits of having a market which is unrestricted or unregulated is this idea of entrepreneurs. When the market is unregulated, when a producer knows that if he is smart enough, if he has produced the good that everyone wants to buy, the entrepreneur knows that he can make unlimited amount of profit. This self-interest, again, according to Adam Smith, can give rise to generations of entrepreneurs. And we cannot simply separate the idea of a free market from the idea of how important entrepreneurs are in an economy. And our slide and our book gives you a list of really important entrepreneurs without whom our lives would not have been what it is right now, right? So, and most of these entrepreneurs are kind of groundbreaking in the sense that whatever they, sometimes an entrepreneur can bring products in the market which really did not exist before, right? In this slide, you are looking at the Henry Ford example, but I always want to give an example of toilet paper. You can think that a car is obviously a major innovation that Henry Ford brought, but think about toilet paper. About 30 years ago, there was not a single brand of toilet paper, right? So someday somebody came up with this idea that people would be willing to buy toilet paper, and now it's a $1 trillion industry, right? So the first guy who came up with this idea was an entrepreneur. He really brought an idea, a product into the market that revolutionized the way we live our lives, right? Obviously, the introduction of T-car by Ford, which was the first family car, family sedan that was produced, obviously changed the way we also live our lives, right? So the role of an entrepreneur cannot be ignored. Okay, some discussions about products and other stuff. I'm going to ignore that. So I have sort of, by skipping a lot of slides, covered the third element of this chapter. The first element of this chapter was to look at the production possibility frontier. Then we looked at this idea of competitive advantage and trade. Then we looked at this idea of a circular flow diagram. Then we looked at this idea of a free market. The last element of this chapter is to spend a little bit of time trying to understand the role of government. Because, we have to convince ourselves, without being biased, is that there are certain degree of role the government has to play in an economy. Because most of the market, if left unregulated, can lead to outcomes that are undesirable. At the very last chapter of this course, we are going to look at some of those undesirable outcomes called externality, where things get produced that we really do not like air pollution. And prices that we pay are the prices that we don't like a monopoly price. So regardless of what you think about the role of the government, we have to agree that there are certain roles that the government has to play in an economy. Okay? The slide provides you with some examples of the kind of role that is unambiguous to everyone. These are not, there is no ambiguity about this, there is no controversy about this. There can be controversy about the extended role the government plays in some economies, but there are some of the roles that government plays in every economy, they are undisputed. And these are some of them. The most important one, the most important role that everyone agrees that the government plays in any economy is that the government provides protection of private property. What does it mean? It means that under the protection of the government, everyone, a farm or household, and everyone else is allowed to own something. Is allowed to own something. Own a property. Buy something and keep that property for yourself. For most of you, this seems like a trivial idea. Because you were raised in a country where, this particular right is being given to you. Right? There are countries where this protection by the government does not exist. Meaning that you can buy a car today, tomorrow morning when you wake up, you see that the car is gone. Okay? How do you live in a country like that? How do you live in an economy like that? And most importantly, what would happen if the government does not provide this protection of private property? Many would argue that, well, if the government doesn't provide protection for this private property, the market can still ensure that those properties are well protected. So you can hire a bodyguard, you can hire a security guard, paying that person a higher price so that your car can be looked after. Are we all clear on that? And it can be easily ensured through our market process. But then we will sort of slowly move towards the normative part of our economics, where we will argue that if we have an economy where government doesn't protect the population, can everyone be protected? In that normative realm, we are going to say that no. If the market is unregulated, if the government doesn't provide protection, many people in the economy, most of them coming from the lower income distribution, will probably lose those goods and services because they simply cannot afford to pay that extra price to hire a bodyguard or a security officer. Are we all clear on that? So one could argue, and I completely agree with that the most of the role that the government plays in an economy mainly stems from the normative side of the economics. It involves from the ethical arguments that we most of the times are interested in when we are thinking about justice, when we are thinking about protecting the vulnerable part of the economy. Government plays an important role. Okay, property rights are a fundamental human rights. Anytime you own a property or buy a property, you should have the right to keep that property to yourself. Without government, that property right is very difficult to maintain. So there is a clear role the government plays in ensuring that the property rights are well ensured or well enforced. Contracts or enforcement of contracts is another area where the government plays a critical role. Example, let's say you sign a contract with your landlord saying that every month you're going to pay about $1,000 and you're going to stay in that house for 6 months. So after a month, your landlord comes to you and asks for more money. It's called extortion, right? The landlord asks for more rent and you refuse to pay that. So the landlord hires some, goons and you are thrown out in the street, right? You are thrown out from your apartment. So the question is, who is going to ensure that when you live inside of a house or an apartment, sign a contract, your landlord is going to follow the rules that are specified in that contract. When both parties of involved in a contract follow the rules of that contract, we call it enforcement. And in almost all cases, enforcement of a contract is ensured by the government. Because without the government, there is actually no one else who would be interested in following the rules that were in that contract. And please, let's try to understand that. The example that I just gave you is an example where the landlord will try to break rules. Right? The tenants also might try to break rules as well. Right? If there is a rule in the contract that says that you cannot really vandalize your apartment, and you do, the government will enforce the contract and government will throw you out. Make sense? So, in this kind of transaction, we need a third party. the government. The next slide has a very interesting case study where the discussion is about this classical movie Wizard of Oz, and it discusses about the idea of property right of that movie, of that characters. And please read that. The book does a better job of explaining the situation. The conclusion that you might derive from this is that property rights are important. Sometimes property rights are impediment as well. Meaning that if there are too much property right, you might not be allowed to make your own music. And you have seen examples like that a lot, right? You might be under a contract that might prevent you from singing or writing, songs for anyone else, and you might be in a loop, right? And we are seeing a case that is unfolding right now, right? Okay. Okay, I'm done. Any questions about? Yeah, these are some stuff that some misperceptions that you can read on your own. I hope that I have covered the materials, deeply enough so that we don't run into the set of problems that we have. So let's spend about a couple of minutes looking at some of these, multiple choice questions. Let's look at this one. Some of the questions are easy, some of the questions are challenging. So what do you think? Okay, so goods and services where such as computers or services such as medical treatments are offered, right? Computers, medical treatment, these are final goods, right? You can buy a computer, you can take it at home and you can start using that. So this is obviously goods that are traded in the product market, right? Let's look at the next one. Oh, this is the same one, right? I apologize. Okay, this one. This is a simple question. You are talking about factors of production. They are obviously all traded in a market called market of competitive market, factor markets, right? Right? Let's look at the next one. Which is the correct answer? So C is the correct answer, right? Although I am going, okay. So although the product and the factor markets are part of a circular flow diagram, they are not participants, right? They are just markets, right? The participants, or the two participants that we know that are part of the circular flow diagram is household and firms, and it is missing the government. The next one. Please read the question. This is a little bit lengthy ones. Wordy questions are always challenging. Which one is the correct answer? Somebody said A. That is the correct answer. Why is B not the correct answer? So B says to prevent individuals from buying or selling their property depending on the circumstances. What does it mean? We have at least 4 remaining minutes. So why is B not the correct answer?
The market doesn't want to prevent you selling property from these levels.
Right, precisely, right? So B is counter to what we have been learning about the market, right? Market never will tell you that, hey, you cannot buy alcoholic beverages because you are less than certain age limit, right? So B is the correct. B cannot be what we are getting from a marketplace. C, either choice is above, so it says that A and B are correct, which is obviously not true. And D, right? D is kind of critical. This is where we start getting confused. So what do you think? Why do you think D is not the correct answer?
Because that would require the government, that would imply that the government is the one in charge of the market and they're determining what is optimal for you.
Very good. And a market really does not ensure that mechanism. It's the people who make sure that the government is intervening. Are we all clear on that? So although in reality we see markets and government really working hand in hand, meaning that there are certain part of the market that is being controlled by the government, that is not the success of the market. That is the success of the economic system. The people who are saying that we want the government to be part of our market activities. Okay. Have a nice weekend.